You are listening to the Why Smart Women podcast, the podcast that helps smart women work out why we repeatedly make the wrong decisions and how to make better ones. From relationships, career choices, finances, to faux fur jackets and kale smoothies. Every moment of every day, we're making decisions. Let's make them good ones. I'm your host, Annie McCubbin, and as a woman of a certain age, I've made my own share of really bad decisions. Not my husband. I don't mean him, though. I did go through some shockers to find him. And I wish this podcast had been around to save me from myself. This podcast will give you insights into the working of your own brain, which will blow your mind. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm recording, and you are listening on this day. Always was, always will be, Aboriginal land. Hello and welcome back, smart women. My guest today is someone I have known for the last 40 years. She's a very good friend of mine. She has been a mentor of mine over that last couple of, 4 decades. And I think what has joined us together and given us has been the building blocks of our friendship is a deep and abiding fascination of what makes people tick. Today we're going to talk about the nature of regret and what's it about, and is there anything we can do to spend maybe a little bit less time in retrospective angst? If you can hear, as we have already spoken to you last week, we are in the middle of downsizing and preparing our house for selling, so that drilling in the background is my husband, David, trying to fix the pool fence, so we must forgive him for that. So, hello, Gay.
Hi, Annie. It's so good to be here with you and to see you again. As you say, the feeling of the friendship is really strong, and seeing your face, it's like it all comes back, the whole 40 years of it.
Yes, we've barely changed, Gay. We've barely changed. So, Gay, what is your what are you doing now with yourself, and what is your background?
Background, my working career came out of advertising, television, radio, in communications essentially. Did all of that for quite some time. I was working for a publishing house when I did a personal development course. And that was like, as you say, it was the answer to all of the things that I'd been fascinated in all my life, of why people do what they do. And it was about sociology and psychology and spirituality and as you say, emotions and behaviours, why we do what we do and what makes people tick. And somewhere the aspiration side of that, so the human potential side of, okay, if we can do all of this, then what else could we do? But then another part of it that was more the spiritual side, I suppose, is the acceptance of what is, which is the work that I really relate to with what you're doing now, is like, what is actually real here? Not necessarily what's true, but what's actually real. And that focused a lot on my somatic experience of the world.
What do you mean by somatic?
Body, in the body. What it feels like, using the senses of the body to have a sense of, in the simplest form, I'm uncomfortable at the moment. And then a question arises, what's going on that is creating this kind of discomfort, this reaction in my body against what's going on. And so it's using all of me. And in some way that connects me to being a real person, a real human being, because that's what I'm stuck with this lifetime around.
Yeah, absolutely.
I am a human being.
And do you think that there's a lot of people that actually are not aware of what's going on in their body?
I think most people are not. Part of our culture, our Western culture, is to actually train people away from it, children away from it. Don't worry about that, don't they? Just sit still, do this, do that. It's just a cut. Don't worry, it's only a flesh wound. Those kind of things that override some of the things. And it doesn't mean that we drop into our emotions completely, but to be aware of is to be able to notice that what is happening in my physical environment is part of the data that is coming into my field, which I could use to make decisions and to decide which way to go. Not infallibly, I have to say.
Yeah, not infallibly. So I think that's really true, isn't it, as well, that we're not aware of what's going on in our bodies. And it's trying to strike the balance between, okay, I now have awareness around what's going on in my body. That balance between I have awareness it doesn't mean I have to wallow around in it or live in it for the next 6 weeks. Like when we decided to sell the house, and which we've lived in for 24 years, and I came home and I looked at the piano that David's mother had gifted us, and I had this really strong sort of feeling that dropped down right from my chest into my stomach, and it stayed with me. It stayed with me for, I don't know, maybe nearly 48 hours with this sort of deep discomfort. Now, I knew what it was.
Yeah.
I understood that it was sort of grief. I understood it. So I had it. And at the same time, I just had to get on with it because we've now got opens and I have to do what I have to do. But I think I understood it. I knew it. It didn't mean it wasn't uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable and I didn't like it, but I wasn't in denial of it. And maybe that's a really strong pointer for people, that we try and push things away.
Yeah, absolutely. The things that are uncomfortable, because and some of the emotions that can come up around as things like shame, some of those, they're really difficult to deal with. And regret is one of those things that's really difficult to deal with. It's kind of, to me, those emotions always have a poignancy to them, like a sense of sadness or loss or diminishment somehow. And I don't want to go there. I want to think I'm fabulous. I want to think it's all going to be okay. It's, the real Pollyanna view of the world that I have.
And the positive thinking, I think that the positive thinking movement has a lot to answer for.
Yes.
Don't you?
Yes.
Because I'm like, I know that as you know, I'm a big gym devotee. And I hear a lot of that, we've just got to stay positive. We've got to stay positive. Well, no, we don't. We don't have to stay positive. It's exhausting, isn't it? Trying to stay positive all the time. It's just rubbish, isn't it?
Yes. And also you miss out on the experience of what it is to be a human being, which around the piano was that feeling for 24, 48 hours. You have an experience of being an alive human being that is not happy. It's adds something to that. From my point of view, when I know that about myself, then I know about other people too, and it will incline me to be more patient or more empathetic to how they are. I don't have to get involved and I don't have to do anything about it, but I can understand why they are doing what they're doing for the moment. When it goes on too long, I tend to actually put an or in there and say something and do something. Because too long, as you say, the wallowing can become an end in and of itself.
I think, don't you think? It's like, and then we've been talking about this notion of an identity narrative, and I think if you do end up too long sitting around in a very deep feeling like that, then that becomes a part of your identity. And then what you expect is everybody to be sympathetic towards you. And, of course, after a while, people are like, I don't care, I've got my own shit. I'm sorry, that's going
Or else
on.
they'd say, poor so-and-so.
Oh, yeah. And who wants that? I personally don't want that.
I had a teacher who used to call that deifying, where you deify the problem. You literally build a shrine to it and bow down to it every morning as my story, the story of, and we can get wedded to our story. And it again, somatically sometimes can actually help you break that, because you check
What do you mean?
Well, you check in with your body and you're actually feeling quite good. It's not the same as the story. But that's the place where you have to bring in the critical thinking, is to be willing to challenge the dominant voice story that's going on in your head about how things are and what's true and what's real.
Yeah.
Is to be able to go, is it really? Is that actually how I'm feeling? Well, actually, I'm about to. I remember a story from when I was about 16. I think probably all 16-year-olds go through it somewhere, of thinking the world was definitely not going my way and I was miserable and, all pubescent and all of the stuff that 16-year-old girls go through, and I was going to kill myself. And I went through this whole thing of working out how I was going to do that.
Yeah.
And then I got to the point, it's all organised. I know what I'm going to do. But there's a party on Saturday, so maybe I'll do it after that. Which point I realised I was probably not going to do it.
Oh, that's a classic. What do I wear to that party? Maybe you should wear something black. Oh, my God. Aren't we just classics with our brains?
It was one of those wake-up moments, like, what is going on in there? That fuels the fascination that I have, is what is going on inside my head that starts me down tracks that...
Right. And haven't we been down some tracks? And it's interesting what you say, I think, about empathy and sympathy, because, of course, the more we understand our own emotional landscape, the more likely I am to be empathetic, sympathetic towards somebody else's. I think there's some really interesting work around sympathy and empathy and the notion of compassion, because we do know that empathy can be weaponized, and that empathy absolutely, because we are so tribally brained, you know, you're in my tribe. If somebody hurts you, I'm going to get, I might have a thought where I want to punish that person because you mean so much to me because you're part of my tribe. So empathy can be problematic. However, compassion, and you would know this because you've done some, you're quite Buddhist, aren't you?
Yes.
So I think compassion as opposed to sympathy, because you can look at the person and go, I really know what it is that you're going through. I'm not going to deep dive in here with you. I'm not going to climb into the morass and swim around in your pain, because once you're in there with them, you can't help anyway, right?
Yes, no, and you're in the same trance then. You're in the same story.
And what do you mean by trance?
Well, it's actually it's very easy to be tranced by something else that's going on. I used to, when I was teaching, use the intro line as once upon a time. And when you say that to a group of people, everybody goes quiet and waits for the story. They're in a trance. And it's a trance we're taught as children. That particular set of words will trigger a certain mental state. And it's very easy to get into that with other people and to trigger it in other people too by telling the stories that we tell about ourselves. The issue for me in that is identification, is what you said before, is how we identify. If I identify with your pain, then I'm in it with you. Yeah, if I stay with, I know, you know, I can recognise what you're feeling because I have felt like that on occasion, or I know that feeling. I can still be myself. I'm I and you are you. We're connected, but we're not the same. And it helps me hold a place. In Buddhism, very much compassion is not just kindness, is actually separate from compassion, curiously. Compassion can sometimes be very tough and very hard and really hard to do, because sometimes the things that needs to be said is not polite or not wanted, and it can be hard to be compassionate. Sometimes it's to leave somebody alone in whatever's going on. It's
like, can you give me an example of that? Like if I'm going through a problem and maybe you see that I do not understand my contribution to the problem and I'm in a state of blame.
Yeah.
Would that be something where you'd go, well, I'm not going to climb in here with you because this story, is that the sort of thing that you're talking about?
Yes. I get an experience out of my own life is somebody who was very close to me was very, very involved in drugs at one stage, and I was being very kind and very understanding and basically co-creating it with this person by not doing it. And one of my teachers said something, you know, how do you deal with somebody that you love who's in that state? And they said, love them. And it's like, yes, of course. But some other part of my brain went, and that's not what I'm actually doing. And so I went and sat with this person and said, you have choices to make in life, and this is the one you're making at the moment, and it's not mine, and I don't want to be part of it. It's too painful, and I can't be with this. I support you being well and happy, and anything you want to do along those lines, I will be there with you. But for in the gutter with the needle hanging out of your arm, I'm not there. I can't be there. You'll have to make a choice.
And would you describe that? I mean, that's, to me, is just really fantastic boundary setting.
And that's compassion, because it was really
that is
genuine.
Compassionate,
the only thing that could really help was the truth, that this is your choice and there's nothing I could do. As awful as that is, there's nothing I can do about it.
And what happened?
We came out of it.
Brilliant.
And that person has been free, and not just because of what I did. What it did was...
No, it was just you. Well done.
It just kind of really put it out there. That's what's real. That's actually what's real here. In our relationship, that's what's real. And they made a choice that worked for them, which was to maintain our relationship and take the help to get better,
awesome.
to deal with the problem in a different kind of way. That's not a miracle cure, but for me, that showed me that compassion isn't just being nice and it isn't being kind necessarily, but it does it's much more reality driven, much more reality based. This is what's real.
This is what's real, and that's where the critical thinking.
And
that's where
a lot of it is we would prefer to live in the fantasies and the trances of it's all going to be gorgeous. If we love each other just enough, it'll all be fabulous. Like, not true.
No.
And so many relationships that I've seen and my own break up over the years of, I should have loved them more. It wouldn't have made any difference. It's not love. Absence of love was not the problem. The problem was the other stuff that we couldn't talk about and couldn't do anything about.
And do you think that is a very female response, that women tend to think? I know it comes up a lot with women in, I know in domestic violence relationships, the person that is attempting to help them will say, why are you staying in this violent relationship? And they'll say, well, I love them.
Yes.
And if I can just love them enough.
Yeah.
Then their behaviour will change. And I think that's a real trap, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I think that over the course of a lifetime, you live long enough, you do, as a woman, need to ask yourself, what is love? And ask that question. There is, in that particular scenario, there's also our biology, is that women are hormonally different from men.
Thank you.
We have
right?
Baseline hormonally different situation.
Exactly.
And what that means in the body is the chemicals that race through our body. It's like there's a whole study done around fight and flight, and suddenly realising actually this is not necessarily what women do. There's an alternate phrase which is thrown around, which is tend and blend. When women are in danger, we will tend to move closer to the person.
Oh my God, I've never heard of this tend and blend.
Tend and blend.
Go for it. Tell me about that.
To try, it's almost like marrying the enemy, is getting close enough, because we're not physically stronger. We can't run faster.
Yep.
What we can do is move in closer and hold. And
what's tend like is in care for?
As in care for, yeah.
And then blend as in merge.
Merge, yeah. And that there is some protection in that. And in a real animal nature sense, there is truth in that. It's the putting your neck down and, surrendering, submitting basically to the dominance, and you will probably survive, hopefully survive.
Yeah, David and I, of course, from our theatre backgrounds, do a lot of work around status.
Yes. So
high status and low status, neither are better, but under pressure,
yes.
Where do you go? Do you submit?
Yes.
Or do you dominate?
Yeah.
And, for most of us, for most of the time, this is just reactivity. We've got no idea why we're doing what we're doing. We just do it because it feels right.
As part of our animal nature. It's like we've learnt it. It's in our DNA. We know how to do it. For women, it's also in our hormones, and that changes when we go through menopause.
Yes,
so we have a whole other ball game where we frankly don't care anymore.
Yeah. Do you care less?
Oh, but even then, I've got this book at home about women's brains through the course of their life, and it talks about that what happens post-menopause is we lose the dopamine flush that comes from helping people. So most of our lives, we actually get the goodies in our brain with a dopamine kind of input that makes us feel better, makes us feel good.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Post-menopause, not so much. It doesn't. So then it's like, well, you know where the sandwiches are, go and make yourself. I don't care anymore because I don't get anything out of it anymore. And I certainly don't get social status out of it anymore. So we're much more inclined to be autonomous, which makes relationships quite challenging in that period.
Yeah, that is so interesting. And I think that's so right about the hormonal, because I know that this notion that women and men are exactly the same because on autopsy our brains are, well, big deal, because it's the hormonal overlay that makes the difference, right? Yes. It's the hormonal overlay. So, sure, which you can't see on autopsy, so shut up. Yeah. Shut up about that. And the fact that women, and this is, we are primed to form community. And at a very, very deep level, I will form community with you because if something happens to me, we are in a community, we are in a tribe, and you will take care of my children.
Yeah.
It's a very, very fundamental thing with women. So I think that notion of forgiveness and then regret. It's like I keep forgiving, and then they, for instance, women walk out of a marriage and then there's a deep sort of well of regret because what was it all for?
Yes, yeah.
Don't you think?
Yes, and the resentment that comes with that too.
So what does the resentment come with?
Well, with the regret comes the resentment of having done that for it to come to nothing. And
that's so sad. Oh, my God, that's a terrible turn of phrase. It's hurt me. Oh, my God.
Sorry about that.
It's all come to nothing. Oh, God, what was it for?
Yeah, I've just gone through this with my daughter, and she
really?
says that often.
Does she mind us talking about it to people who possibly in Sweden, India,
She'll talk to anybody.
Wales?
Doesn't stop and listen here.
All over the world.
It's been really good. It's been really good for me to listen to that, and very much that's about it. All of that I put in that wasn't recognised, that wasn't seen, that wasn't valued. In the end, it wasn't valued. And a lot of resentment that she has, and resentment, of course, it's just another form of anger. Can
you talk about that for a minute? Because, of course, I agree, but can you unpack how come resentment is just another form of anger?
It's kind of stuck anger. It's like what we don't say. Instead of, don't talk to me like that, we sit on it, and it kind of mulls around inside and becomes just like, grumbly kind of resenting something. But it really is a form of anger. Indirect anger.
And I think that notion of it being stuck, I can definitely recognise it in myself when it gets stuck, and it somatizes in my stomach. I can feel it when I've got that grumbling. It's like a grumbling resentment.
Mine is in my jaw.
Oh, you get in your jaw. Yeah. So your daughter, right? So it's like, what was it for? Is that is that the sort of thinking around it?
The sense of having as a woman, of what she brought to the marriage with the children and all of that wasn't valued in the end somehow.
And was it not valued? Is that true?
It's hard to say.
Yeah, who knows?
I'll never get inside his head, her head, that was in their marriage.
Yeah, but she feels
that's what she feels, and that's what she's been dealing with, of getting past it, which she pretty much is now. It's like getting to a point, and it's what she's done, how she's done that is really own that as a woman, that is actually the value that she brings. There's nothing wrong with caring about people. There's nothing wrong, but it's being valued for it. So now she is much more requiring of people valuing that attention, that time that she puts into whatever, a dinner party or that sort of thing, is recognising that as a woman, that's the quality she brings. And in her work she does. And people say that about her, is when she walks onto a set, everything gets alive.
What does she do?
She works in television, in public relations in television.
So she's a chip off the old block.
Yeah, a bit, but she stayed more on the entertainment side of it, the deep and meaningful.
Yeah, okay.
So it's something that she's now, instead of being ashamed of or regretting, that she's proud of. That as a woman, this is the quality she brings, and it's valuable. It's valuable to our communities, it's valuable to our work, it's valuable to our family. That's it. Yeah. And I'm not going to do any less. Don't ask me to.
Yeah. And I think if you have that natural capacity to sort of coalesce things around you, I know I have that as a person. I can draw things together, and there's a sense of there's a lot of purpose in that for me, that I can form. I form little communities because I genuinely really, really like people.
Yes,
and I guess the podcast is another version of that.
Yes, absolutely. Right. And I think it's an incredibly beautiful trait that women have, is this ability to create connection and hold connection in communities. I do a lot of corporate work now around leadership development, particularly.
We do it together.
Seeing very much how women do that in business. It's like a problem will arise, and then women will start talking about it with each other. It's like they'll form a group to talk about it. And it's interesting watching women, particularly when it's just women, talking and working out a problem together. They all talk all over each other.
Yeah, but listen to.
At the same time. And somehow what they do is build. Like they build an idea, and at the end of it, there's this great idea, and nobody knows whose idea it was anymore. And
there's less. Well, I'm not saying I don't want to eulogise women, because obviously there's some women who are very competitive,
like
right? But I think that notion that it is not the inception of an idea is not the most important thing. It's the solution, the group solution that we have come up with.
Yeah.
I just was, as you know, I'm in the middle of downsizing, so we're going to pack this house up. Like other people spend 2 years planning it. We spent about 45 seconds, and now we're halfway through it, and packing up the house. And so I've got, I think I've worked out, I've probably got 1,500 books or 2,000 books, massive reader. And so I packed them up, and then I put them in the car, and I was down having coffee with my gym friends this morning, and all four of us ended up searching for the place, going to the place, getting them out of the car. Somebody took the dog, You know, it becomes this sort of community experience where everybody feels involved, but nobody's resentful.
Yeah.
Nobody's resentful about contributing, because in a group where it's equal, there's a lot of reciprocity.
Yes.
And I think that for all of us, it's important that reciprocity is there, then we don't get resentful.
Yes, yeah. And that sense of the fact that you like we're all connected in a group, that's the reward in it, I think. That for me, that displaces a lot of other things that I could be doing instead, like getting resentful or thinking, I'd rather be somewhere else doing something else. There's an enjoyment in that community and working together. I actually believe all people are like this. I think this is not just women. Women show it much more obviously.
Yeah, that's right.
But I believe men do the same thing, that really they say they'll come to work for the money, but really they just love doing things together.
Yeah.
You watch a group of engineers solving a problem, it's the most fascinating experience.
Yeah.
They are totally involved. They're like 9-year-old boys trying to build a skate park in the backyard.
Yeah, that's right.
And they are completely involved and engaged
And
in
that's
it.
the state of flow, right?
And the same thing, no ego particularly, no competition particularly, just let's solve this, let's make this happen.
And I think I look at David and his friends. He's got a very close group of friends. They all play soccer, and they all turn up. They've all turned up en masse as well to help. But it's almost like it's different. They've sort of got parallel play. They're like 3-year-olds with parallel play. Do you know what I mean? They're sort of unified but on their own at the same time, like talking, more sort of issuing instructions to each other.
Yeah.
And there's more sort of that banter rather than the deep and meaningfuls that we'd get into every 12 seconds. So I just, because I'm aware that we're getting on in time, I guess I just wanted to talk about that notion of the decisions that we've made and the amount of time we spend being regretful and thinking, I should have done it differently. And the point of that and how we can maybe apply some critical thinking so that the framing of it is different because it's pointless, right?
Yes, yes. It doesn't. It's like guilt. It really doesn't add much of anything, and not even reflection, particularly because you keep going over the same thing over and over again. In my teaching of personal development work, we developed a course at one stage called Eldership, and it was for people over 50, which made people who were 45 very resentful because they couldn't do the
back
course.
Off.
It was like, no. But it was about that sense of getting to a certain point in your life, and as somebody said to me, seeing the finishing post. It's like, actually, let's get real about this. One of the processes was actually looking at regret and looking back over your life and spending time reflecting on the places where you felt like you made a mistake, which you really did make a mistake, the things that you regret doing, not doing, and basically so really sitting with, what does that mean to you? The fact that these things happened because of decisions you made or because of circumstances or your reaction, whatever. Who's to blame doesn't matter in that. Who's at fault doesn't matter.
But we do. It's a very common human response to agitate and cogitate for a long time, sometimes a lifetime.
Yes.
You hear of siblings that haven't spoken for 40 years because it's like, who's to blame?
At that point, I would sort of point out that this is fairly narcissistic, and really you are not the centre.
By that? What do you mean by narcissistic?
When you, it's like, when you believe that you're the centre of the universe. I remember at school being asked to go to the headmistress's office, and my first was, what have I done wrong? As if it was about me. But actually she wanted me there because she wanted me to do something else. It was nothing to do with me, but I assume it was. That's our narcissism, our self-centeredness. In Buddhism, they call it self-cherishing, where we put ourselves at the centre of everything. And that's not feasible. It's actually not reasonable, not feasible at all. But by stopping and challenging that so that it's not what I did or somebody else did or didn't do actually isn't relevant to how I am with those events and what I made of them, what I came to, what I understand about myself, what I've learnt, good, bad and indifferent, about myself because of those events. And then the end of this process was to take with you what was of value out of that, take the value out of it, of what you learnt. What do you want to keep doing? What do you want to stop doing? As a kind of a turning point in your life at around about that age. Say, I've got, between 20, 30, maybe 40 years left to live. How am I going to do that? Given the 50 years of experience I've had till now, what am I going to do next? What do I take with me? What do I leave behind? And regret was a big part of what people left behind. Of like, it doesn't make any difference. Exactly what you said. It doesn't make any difference to be regretful of
we're
that.
so
I made a mistake.
attached to it, aren't we?
Yeah.
So attached.
I made a mistake. It's done. There's nothing I can do about that except learn from it or apologise. Do the AA thing of make amends kind of thing, which I think is a lovely process
Me
to
too.
do.
Although
and
you
then
do-
to let it go.
I think there's a really interesting cognitive flaw called primary attribution error. And primary attribution error, so attribution on itself is just fascinating, but primary attribution error is that if I am late to something, then it's because I understand the circumstances under which I'm operating. So I understand that it was difficult for me and the dog was sick and I had to go to the vet and there was a car accident and I couldn't get there. And so I am very self-forgiving now about myself. If you are late, Gay, it's because of a character flaw.
Yes.
Right? Because you're lazy and you're disorganised.
Yes. Or you disrespect me.
And then it gets into this very, very personal thing where I understand myself because I'm so exquisitely involved in my own interior circumstances, right?
Yeah.
Or the bits I want to look at anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know about your life. So it's easy for me to blame you and forgive myself in terms of that. And that notion of constantly looking outside yourself and seeing character flaw in other people as opposed to them also just being the victim of circumstances. Yeah. And I think circumstances and situations are much neglected in our analysis of other people.
Yeah.
We are very impacted on by our circumstances.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right? And yet we want to put people into a neat thing about this is your personality type.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, is it?
Yeah, well, momentarily.
Momentarily, that's what I'm like.
Yeah.
Which I think is, it's always interesting when I do programs and, I say to people, because we do communications and how are you going to lead? How are you going to lead? And so we say, okay, well, you've got that bit down, Pat. You're a really, really good listener. But maybe what you need to do is be able to hold your ground more and be more directive, let's just say. And then they will say to me, it doesn't feel like me. That's just not me.
Yes, yes.
And it's like, well, who are you? And are you the same at 20, 30, 40, 50?
Yes.
Because it's like this fixed notion of who a person is. Well, we're not fixed.
No.
We are evolving.
Yes.
Our brains are like a composite, not a composite. What are our brains like? Like a committee.
Yes.
Our brains are like a committee, right? So this idea of, and I think it's a terrible thing to say to a child is just be yourself. I think it's terrible. Like leave them alone. Like maybe they want to be like that today, maybe because we're always developing, right?
Yes.
So I think that idea is quite narcissistic. This is me. Yes. This is who I am, and you must service me in the manner to which I expect to be, right?
And then that becomes our identity to which we then attach and say, this, as you say, this is who I am or this is not me.
This is not me,
Phrase I used to always get people to add on to is up until now. So this is not me up until now. And
I like that.
It opens a loop for something else to happen. Who knows what's going to happen, but it opens a loop that, it just reminds you that it is a momentary. It's a momentary. We are a momentary experience, moment
by moment. We're developing.
In Buddhism a lot, they talk about causes and conditions as being huge. The main part about we are adaptive to causes and conditions all the time on an ongoing basis.
What do you mean?
Well, we are constantly changing ourselves in relation to changing circumstances and conditions.
That's right.
All the time. Every time we move, we're changing in relation to a set of changes that are happening either internally or externally. And it's that's life. That is actually life. When it stops, we're dead.
Yeah, that's right.
It's too late now.
Yeah. Stop trying now. You're under the ground. Yeah, there's because David and I have done the acceptance commitment therapy training, which we loved. And that is a lot around experiential avoidance. How much time we spend trying to avoid anything that's not pleasant. Yeah. Right. I don't like that. I don't want to have that. I'm going to have a drink now, or I'm going to smoke something. I'm going to do anything to get away from the feeling. And experiential avoidance, and what we are after is flexibility in our thinking.
Yeah.
Which moves us out of that notion of this is the way I think. Well, this is the way I've always thought. Yes. So why would I change?
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
When in fact, if you're flexible, then you're adaptive to the external environment and you're much more likely to lead a more productive life, right?
Yes, and fulfilling in a satisfying, like when you say about avoid things that we avoid, I've watched people over years avoiding happiness exactly the same way.
Wow, yeah.
Because it's actually really hard to be happy and have happiness.
If their identity narrative is I'm a person who had a terrible life.
Weirdly, in our culture, it's like our culture is based on this idea that there's something to be fixed all the time. And we hardly ever get to just have. And for some people, it's almost impossible to hold in themselves the feeling of loved or being loved.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And you watch them blow their relationships up because they can't handle the happiness. And that to me is really
so sad.
Tragic.
Yeah.
Like, wow, because there's no end to that. You'll always have to keep doing it as long as you're identified with I can't have love, I can't be loved.
Yeah,
That's
I can't.
how it is.
And then because there's people that I have certainly met over my life who have always said I want to be loved, but then as soon as you start to get close to them, there's that unconscious desire to fuck it up.
Yeah,
I'm going to do something there to fuck this up.
The prickles come out somehow, and
it's so
away.
unconscious. It's so unconscious. It's tricky, isn't it?
Very tricky.
So I think, and I always say that, it is true that some people have spent, a large portion of their life suffering in real circumstances. There's no two ways about it. That is true.
Yeah.
I've been very lucky in my life, but also I view my life through a certain filter.
Yeah.
I am more likely to go, well, that happened.
Yeah.
But that's, that is, I'm naturally ebullient. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And then, but obviously there's days when I don't feel like that. But generally speaking, I'm like, personally, I don't regret anything because I'm here.
Yes.
I've arrived here.
Yes.
And
still upright, still breathing in and out.
But that's right.
Yeah.
I'm still alive. There's possibilities ahead of me.
Yeah.
And I have a very full life, and it's not the same for everybody. And I recognize that.
Yeah.
It's been easier for me in some ways.
I think partly is that because I relate to what you're saying. I call myself like I'm an optimist, basically.
Yeah, me too.
Relentlessly. Yeah. But it's also through the work that we do, we see it proved over and over again, watching people do the same thing. Not because they are optimistic, but because they learn to view things differently, to actually apply the thinking to the circumstances and get through it in a different kind of way. So for me, I've had, like, having watched people grow in that way and use their mind differently to breaking the habit of identity. Basically, it's like, no, that's not who I am. It's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
Or that's the behavior. What's the value underneath that drives that behavior? Ooh, need to do something about that. And being willing to give up the identity, that attachment to this is who I am, and I insist on it, is like, well, maybe not so much, and let that go. I've seen that thousands of times with all of the students from personal development courses and in leadership work where, in a leadership group of 20 people, 12 of them might actually get to that place of suddenly going, oh, I could do something different.
Yeah.
And
it's so profound, that, isn't it?
And I see that as positivity. It's looking at the potential of a situation honestly, front on, telling the hardline truth, at least to yourself, and then being able to make a different choice, knowing that you're losing who you were and being willing to be something that you don't know who you're becoming anymore. And that's a big journey. That's a big deal. And why a lot of people don't do it is because it's scary to let go your idea of who you are. It is who we are. This is myself. This is who I am. And I know how this works. Painful or not, I know how this self works. But some people are willing to go, maybe it's not all I could be. Maybe it's not all that's going on here.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I know I've seen that so much in the work that we do, that idea of, but I can't. And I think there's so much truth in, this may not be a very comfortable life that I lead, but at least I know it.
Yeah.
And
I have some control over it.
Yeah, I'm furious all the time and I hate people.
But
but at least that's me.
Yes.
And there's safety in me as opposed to going, well, hang on, maybe all people, it's interesting, who was I listening to? And they were talking about cynicism. And the difference, because, I'm a skeptic and people confuse skepticism and cynicism all the time. It's not remotely the same.
No.
So skepticism is not believing things on face value, but looking for evidence. I will look for evidence before I'll think that I agree with something. Cynicism is looking at life through the filter of nobody does anything just out of kindness. Everybody's out for something, and they reckon there's this data around this, that there's a perception that cynical people, right, who are sort of looking at life through a narrowed-eyed sort of I know what you're up to, are better at judging other people's characters and picking liars. This is the perception.
Yeah, I can see
it's
that.
not true.
Oh, really?
Do you know why it's not true? Because they're looking at everything through a narrower lens.
Yeah.
So say you because you're more open and you've trained yourself to be open, are more available. That's it's Gay's phone's ringing. She's very important. You're more open to the possibility of what people are like.
Yeah.
Maybe you're out for yourself, but maybe that person that's sitting over there in the corner that looks angry, maybe they had a bad day yesterday.
Yeah.
And maybe they're capable of great human kindness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I see that. When you talk about cynicism, I think of it as, to me, the people I've met who are very, very cynical are afraid not to be disappointed almost.
100%.
It's like they've
Get in first. Get in first.
The hurt or the lack of your expectations not met has been so big that they just won't go there again. Yep. So it's like a sort of stuck place, a stuck place of disappointment.
Yeah.
And skepticism, I've always, in courses I always talk about, because people will put their hand up and say, I'm not going to listen to this because I'm a skeptic. And I say, great, because it comes from the Greek. Skepsis means to think.
Yep.
I'm really pleased about that.
Yep.
Keep thinking.
Yeah, keep
going.
thinking. Yep.
Don't care what the result is, but just keep going with it. I think, like, when people get stuck in those places, in cynicism, that is a really painful place to me, because
terrible.
How do you find joy in life?
There's no joy in it.
How happiness, you could only keep proving that you were right.
That people are awful.
But I don't know how many people get to the grave or the pearly gates or wherever it is we go and go, see, I was right.
I was right. People are awful. Right?
They really are.
People are only out for themselves. It's so true. It's such a protective state. So I guess, because we've got to wrap up in a minute. So what do we do? What do people do if they've recognised that their thinking is really stuck and they do have a perception of self that precludes possibilities?
Yeah.
And
to me, the one of the things that breaks trances, and these are trances, we talk ourselves into this and then we believe it and then we think that's what's real. One of the ways that for me it works quite well is humour, is to start to laugh at yourself. I have a phrase on my computer at home, which is, when we can learn to laugh at ourselves, we'll never run out of things to amuse ourselves with. And there's something that breaks it when you can start laughing at you. Oh, there I go again. Oh, Mrs. Misery Guts. Really? Again?
Yeah,
we're going to do that story again? It's like, have another voice. And what happens psychologically is, by giving it another voice, you're not putting them into opposition with each other. You're providing like a witness where you can watch what you're doing. And that's what breaks ego identification. It's like we start to lose the sense of absolute rightness of our identity by telling jokes about that, loving it sometimes. It's like, I've worked with clients where they're so addicted to a particular behaviour and I start congratulating them on how well they do that.
yeah, absolutely.
It's like, you are so good at hating yourself. You are a champion.
Yeah, you're award winning.
And weirdly it works. They kind of laugh and then stop. Stop it. I mean, it's obviously habits are entrenched and you have to keep doing that. But to have a position where you could look at what you're doing, and humour seems to be an easy one for us to do. Maybe it's because that's an Australian thing. We used to take the piss out of things.
I think it's an English thing as well when I think about it, don't you? There's I could be wrong, there's more of an earnestness about Americans, but I think, don't you reckon?
Yes.
They're just sort of so used to their voice being really important and heard. But I think there's something about the English as well. We talk about in acceptance commitment the notion of recognising the little dictator in your head. Yeah. There's a little dictator, you must stick to the rules or you'll die or you're going to be killed. And the other one, the overly helpful neighbour that's just always there and always got a little bit of advice when you didn't actually ask them.
Yeah.
But yeah, that notion of actually giving the repetitive voice in your head another quality as well.
Yeah.
Like doing a cartoon voice, because of course it just takes the power, because people think that applying critical thinking is arguing with yourself. It's absolutely not.
Yes.
As we know, we get, I've got quite a lot of anxiety. I mean, I've worked on it, but it still pops its head up. And if I argue with myself, I always think I'm right. That doesn't sound right, but it is right. I know I should be worried about that. Like I always win. Okay, well, that is awesome, Gay. Do you think you might come back again? I know it's hard for you because you've had to come down from, where have you come down from?
Northern Rivers, northern New South Wales.
How far is that?
It's about an hour on the plane.
Okay. Is it an hour on the plane? Did you fly down or did you drive?
No, I flew down.
Oh, yeah, an hour on the plane. It's nothing. Come back again.
Yeah.
Well, that has been awesome, and I hope that the smart women and smart men that may be listening out there are going to maybe start recognising some of those thinking patterns in your brain and applying some critical thinking to them, and then maybe entertaining the notion that that thinking pattern, that habitualised thinking, is not actually all there is to you. Yeah. It's just a habit.
Yes.
Right, and we don't mean to minimise it. Right.
No, and what's beyond that is such a wide world of adventure and different ways of seeing things, and that moment of waking up, that's moment in your brain where you go, oh my God, and seeing the world differently.
Yeah.
It's magical. It's not magical thinking, but it's a magical kind of place to be in, to be able to view the world as continually new, because you don't know, you may never have seen it before.
You may not have. And this morning when I was, I'd gotten a coffee for David, then gone off to drop the books at Lifeline with my 17 friends, and then ordered the coffee, and then realised I hadn't got the coffee, and I was going back to get the coffee, and and I was driving back going, oh, idiot, I forgot the coffee, and a hearse drove past me, right, with the flowers in the back, and I went, oh, it doesn't matter about the coffee.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter about the coffee. This is a beautiful day in Sydney, Australia, right? I'm
Timely
super
reminder.
lucky. Right, I'm sitting, I'm breathing, I'm driving a car. All is good.
Yeah, all is good.
All is good. Okay, thanks so much, Gay. That was absolutely gorgeous. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell your friends about me. Hello to everybody who's in India and Malta and Italy and all over the world. Thank you so much for listening. I love you all. See you next time. Bye. Thanks for tuning into Why Smart Women with me, Annie McCubbin. I hope today's episode has ignited your curiosity and left you feeling inspired by my anti-motivational style. Join me next time as we continue to unravel the fascinating layers of our brains and develop ways to sort out the fact from the fiction and the over 6,000 thoughts we have in the course of every day. Remember, intelligence isn't enough. You can be as smart as paint, but it's not just about what you know, it's about how you think. And in all this talk of whether or not you can trust your gut, if you ever feel unsafe, whether it's in the street, at work, in a car park, in a bar, or in your own home, please respect that gut feeling. Staying safe needs to be our primary objective. We can build better lives, but we have to stay safe to do that. And don't forget to subscribe, rate and review the podcast and share it with your fellow smart women and allies. Together, we're hopefully reshaping the narrative around women and making better decisions. So until next time, stay sharp, stay savvy, and keep your critical thinking hat shiny. This is Annie McCubbin signing off from Why Smart Women. See you later. This episode was produced by Harris and Hess. It was executive produced and written by me, Annie McCubbin.